We on the air? Mach Bell here, Boston rock survivor, sang with Thundertrain, the legendary Joe Perry Project, and a whole bunch of others. I came from Ohio originally, moved to Massachusetts when I was a kid, and I think by 1966 I was about 13 years old. And we used to listen to the local AM radio, and we were listening to Barry and the Remains, the Rockin' Ramrods, Teddy and the Pandas. I think Peter Wolf was with the Hallucinations by then, The Lost with Willie Alexander. I was heavily into all that garage rock, and of course the British Invasion, Stones mainly. We worked through the later part of the 60s playing the Battle of the Bands in Holliston, the town where I grew up, and the teen dances, the churches, the schools. I was a lead guitarist at this point. By the late 60s, the FM radio started to happen, and everything got a lot heavier and a lot more complex all of a sudden. I think by the early 70s was when Wolf left the Hallucinations and started up with the J.Geils band, and I went up the street from Holliston to see a new band called Aerosmith at the Lakeview Ballroom. And it was seeing these guys, I think in late 70, 71, that really inspired me to make the switch from guitar to the lead singing. Boston was starting to really simmer with an underground scene at this point, and New York City as well. And I think it was in this early 70s, bands like the New York Dolls out of New York were starting to get this glitter rock, very exciting rock and roll scene that I was very interested in. I went out to California at this point. I hitchhiked out to the Sunset Strip. I was checking out the Whiskey A Go-Go and Rodney Bingenheimer's English disco, and I said, you know, I want to take this energy and bring it back to Boston and put something like this together. And that was what Thundertrain was in 1974, August of 74. Bobby Edwards, our drummer, Steven Silva, lead guitar, and the Provo brothers, Rick and Cool Gene Provo on guitar and bass, and myself as the lead singer. And Thundertrain started out in 74. Bands were playing around in the Boston area, but we didn't really have a scene yet. But bands like Ready Teddy, Joanna Wild that featured John Butcher, bands were playing 4 nights a week in clubs, mixing the covers of the day. Thundertrain, for instance, we were doing Lou Reed, some David Bowie. A little bit of Stones, but working on our original material all the time. By 75, we released our own single. The Ready Teddy guys also released a record that year, I believe. And it was sometime around now, in 75, yeah, about 75, that in the Jimmy Isaac Sellers by Starlight column in the Phoenix, we would read that, and we started to hear about a buzz happening out of the Rat in Kenmore Square. Mickey Clean and the Mez were jamming with Willie Alexander, Willie Loco Alexander, on a Tuesday night. It was this new punk music, or this is how it was being described to me. I showed up there with 13 other people and checked it out, and I was trying to figure out how my band, Thundertrain, could intersect with this new energy and come into Boston, because we did share a certain do-it-yourself mentality, and there certainly was an energy and a honesty to our type of music that when I did meet Willie, we hit it off well. And Willie, in fact, came back and played piano on our second single, Hot for Teacher. Around this time, in the mid-70s, one of the biggest bands in Boston was Duke and the Drivers, and their bass player, Earthquake Greg Morton, discovered Thundertrain. He came to one of our rehearsals, and he taped a rehearsal, and he found this one piece of music called Hot for Teacher that we were performing that he really was hot on. He had his own record label called Jelly that had a few records out at the time. He brought us in as their first rock act. We cut Hot for Teacher. Greg brought me around to Maxan on BCN, to Ken Shelton over at COZ, and the other college, Oedipus over at TBS, all the college stations, and Hot for Teacher, our single in '76, just took off. Soon we had an album called Teenage Suicide that followed that. There was an energy, as I said, at the Rat from a lot of other bands, like Willie's band, like Sass and Susan and Third Rail and DMZ, and actually Rick Ocasek at the time was trying to get his band, then called Captain Swing, later of course the Cars, to be a part of that scene as well, but didn't quite make the cut for the group that got to cut live at the Rat. I think that was in late '76, early '77. 10 bands. We all recorded at the Rat, released the 2-album set, and then we packed up and we all headed to New York, where we played at CBGB's for a week together, all the bands. This was a great time. This is when I started to get to know the Ramones, Stiv Bators, the Dead Boys, Annie Golden, the Shirts, and this really good chemistry between the New York and the Boston bands happened in that mid-early '70s time frame, where we would go to New York to play Max's or CBGB's and stay at the Shirts' apartment or the Dead Boys' apartment. They'd come to Boston and stay at our place. There were a lot of other things adding to the energy at this point. One of them being in Massachusetts, the drinking age had been decreased to 18. So we had a very young crowd in the clubs in New York and Boston at that point. It was a very exciting, great place to be in your young mid-20s like I was. Thundertrain ran until '79 when we finally disbanded. Actually didn't disband. We started to shrink in size. We lost Steven Silva, our lead guitarist, who's now in LA working in the film industry, and we became Hits as a 4-man. And then we lost Cool Gene and became the Mag 4 as a 3-piece. Still playing, but kind of searching for our way, and what exactly we were going to do. And it was about this time that I got a call from Greg Morton, from Duke and the Drivers, who now was working as a road manager for Jonathan Edwards out of the Tim Collins office, management office in Boston. And Tim had just signed Joe Perry as a solo act. And Greg had suggested Mach Bell as a lead singer. So things came around, and I actually turned down the offer when Greg first called, because I just didn't see it panning out. I saw myself getting my hopes way up and then not having it work out and being very depressed, and I didn't want to tempt myself. But Greg called again and said, "Listen, buddy, this is your gig. Let's go." So I took Greg's advice, being my guru for a long time, came back and joined the Joe Perry Project. That was in '82, very early '82, and I stayed with Joe for 2.5 years. And we did, I think, 238 live gigs together, recorded the Once a Rocker album. It was a very, to say the least, exciting and rewarding experience working with Joe, Danny Hargrove, Joe Pett, Ronnie Stewart, just fantastic musicians, and a really great crew to be out on the road with.
Come on,